My name is Sam Jenks, and welcome to another episode of The Way We Source, a podcast hosted by Kodiak Hub, where we share our talks with procurement practitioners, leaders, experts, consultants, content gurus, and people that we find downright inspiring, diving into the role that sourcing and procurement plays in the way that we live. If you like today's episode, as always, make sure to rate the program and give us a follow. Today, we have a special guest, someone who likes to describe herself as a generalist, but has definitely built a unique career across various sectors in procurement. From Procter and Gamble to BT to financial services, luxury goods, even to whiskey. She spent decades inside industries where the stakes, margins, and supplier dynamics could not be more different than one another. But underneath all of it is one consistent belief. Procurement's real job isn't policing spend, it's helping companies to be able to create value. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Adrienne Cole. Adrienne is now branched out, having her own firm, Excellence in Procurement. She works as an independent procurement consultant, helping scaling businesses and enterprises teams rethink how they operate in an era where AI, relationships, and strategic thinking are colliding faster than most companies are really even prepared for. Thank you for keeping our listeners prepared today, Adrienne. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. It's great to be here.
Super excited to be able to have you as well. We were talking about in some of the prep work, you inspired a post for me on LinkedIn, and I have to start there. You said to me that one of the most important tools in procurement is not your savings calculators or your ability to negotiate or your spend cubes. One of your most important tools are your feet, right?
That's right.
What do you
That's
mean by
right.
that?
Legs, I always
Your
say.
legs. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. What do you mean by
What do
that,
I mean
Adrian?
by that? I used to say that to my team when I worked at British Telecom on the
Mm.
sixth floor, and the salespeople and the deal makers on the customer side worked on the fifth floor. So when the team would come to me and say that person didn't answer my email, and that person's really difficult, and that person wants all these unreasonable things, I used to say, "Well, did you go downstairs and talk to them?" And they would invariably say, "Yes, I sent them an email." And I would say,
Mm.
"I'm not asking you if you sent them an email. I'm asking you if you went downstairs, stood at their desk, had a conversation, and maybe even went and had a cup of coffee with them and have a conversation." And I used to say, "If you don't use those legs now, they're going to shrivel up and you'll be left with like little short legs like a kangaroo." So, it's a funny anecdote, but it's a very serious point. And I
Yeah.
was reflecting a little bit before we spoke again this evening, Sam. Um, One of the things that drew me to procurement in the first place as a career was that it's a mix of qualitative and quantitative skills. So,
Mm.
way back in the day, I had filled out the graduate employment form for Procter and Gamble, and I had ticked various boxes, and one of them was marketing. And they rang me and they said, "We're going to interview you, but we're giving you a choice between procurement and marketing." And I wasn't really entirely sure what marketing involved at that stage. So I went for procurement because I thought there would be something more concrete about it. Um, and throughout my career, that it's really held me in good stead because I like the concrete, I like the quantitative, I like,
Mm.
going off and looking at numbers, but I wouldn't be able to do that solely. Um, because I'm also very much and more so a people person and a relationship person. So what's really important in procurement is to have both of those skill sets. You need to be numerate
Yeah.
and you need to be emotionally literate. And so it's very, very important to build relationships internally and externally. And that's the serious point underlying the don't forget to use your legs point.
So well put, and I think that balance is also what draws a lot of people to the role as well. Equal to that, and the ability to use your legs and opportunity to use your legs. I think that the role, at least in a more traditional sense, or maybe in a prior in some of the prior years in procurement, is also given the opportunity to travel. And I think with the world
Mhm.
opening back up, it's giving that opportunity again. And that's an interesting though aspect, right? Is that you need to be able to serve stakeholders, and that, of course, is where you're able to be a value driver, not, of course, sitting behind your desk and in
Mhm.
front of your emails. So I could not agree more. You had mentioned that you believe that procurement is right now in 2026 at a bit of an inflection point. And I wanted to dig into that a little bit. What specifically right now feels like a time, I would say, that's compared to others as like maybe a more transformational wave in this era of AI and rethinking the operating model and alike. What do you think is that inflection point that procurement's at, and what are some of the decisions that procurement organizations need to make right now?
Yeah, I do really genuinely think we are at this inflection point now, and it's been building for a while. And I think it is about the pace of change of AI
Mm,
and about the natural language capability of AI. So I think there was um, an era, maybe from some sort of 10 years ago until maybe 2 years ago, when there was, if you like, that balance between the numeracy and the strategic thinking and the relationship capabilities had kind of tilted very much towards the numerate. I think we were for a
mm,
while a bit lost in the landscape of uh, this is a job about how good you are at Excel. Um,
mm,
and, while the numbers are important, it's definitely not the whole story. And as I say, I think the balance was shifting a little bit onto too much numbers and not enough going out, talking to people, thinking, understanding, looking at the wider business landscape and what your business is trying to achieve, and also
mm.
looking at your supply industries and your supplier organizations and their problems and challenges and objectives. So I think we were kind of lost there a little bit. And I feel that we're in the last kind of sort of from the last 6 months to the last 18 months, it feels like, with the pace of AI and the state of AI right now, there has been this unleashing of capability. So with the ability for everybody to use AI now in such a naturalistic way, it's
Mm.
unlocking data and analysis that we didn't previously have access to. So um, I feel now envious of someone starting out in their procurement career, because if I had had
Yeah.
the access to information, analysis, insights, overviews, and the ability to make sense of the world in the way that a graduate has now, if I had had that
Yeah.
25, 30 years ago, I'd have thought I'd died and gone to heaven. So
Mm.
what you have now, I think, is we've kind of got over this hump of it's all about the data, but we don't have the tools. And now it's all about the data. We do have the tools, and we can come back round to now you have the ability to do something with the data. So
Mm.
so once you have are not spending all this time, using Excel to troll through stuff, you actually have the ability to
Right.
think, and that makes it a much more interesting job. It makes you capable of delivering much more strategic value to the company.
It's interesting because it's like what's coming into focus is not, for example, the ability to be able to, how would I say, create intelligence or create insights, but actually action and execute upon them,
Yes,
right? It's the
exactly.
execution that is coming into focus as that next layer. And I'm curious, what do you think are ways that this new wave of technology are going to show up? Like, what is it, in your words, unlocking for a procurement professional starting today, maybe that didn't exist prior? Can you think of any concrete examples?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So I think in a sense an obvious one is speed. So
Mm,
so data that took months and months and months to get to create an RFP, to match up all the materials for the RFP. If you're in a direct in the, if you live in the direct world where you have uh, hundreds, thousands of lines of references, it could take you months to reconcile all of that data from your ERP system, and so to actually
right.
just work out what is it that you need to tender. Um,
Yeah.
so the ability that you now have to kind of harmonize all that data and say, okay, this is what I want to buy. This is to put together an RFP, or equally to put together an industry analysis, or to prepare for a negotiation by collating all the data on a single supplier. All of that sort of information that you can now collate is really giving you speed. So, and
Yeah.
procurement has long labored, in the face of you're just a blocker, you're slow, you slow everything down. So
Mm.
to be actually able to do things kind of quickly and to a point that's good enough on which to work with is a real improvement for procurement folks. So speed is one thing, which we all need more and more every day in all our businesses. And the other is insight, because what I felt often in my kind of corporate procurement life was that I used to laugh, like, thinking is what I do at 4 o'clock on a Friday, as a kind of a treat to myself. So
Hmm.
I get to have this half hour where I actually think about stuff, because the rest of the work, I come in on Monday morning and I'm just doing all the
Mm.
time. So when you have lots of information, it's only helpful if you can see some kind of pattern in it, if you can see some kind of insight into it, which you can
Right.
then translate into a plan and into a strategy that's going to deliver value. So,
Yeah.
um, having the tools that we have now are such that they can deliver the data, they can deliver the insights, and then they can help you build your thinking into that robust planning, and so that you are not just acting all the time, and that you're actually having the uh, you have the room to have strategic thinking, strategic conversations, and then I think you're really adding value to the company, because it isn't about, really, at the end of the day, how cheaply can you buy something, or how much
Right.
competition you can generate, or how quickly you can make something happen. All of those are important, but they're only important if you're focusing your efforts on the right things in the right direction, which is where the company really wants you to be. And you can't get all of that out of a spreadsheet, or, as we said before, sitting behind your computer on your own.
Mhm. Well said. Um, I think about this context of, MCPs opening up insights of systems of record, an ERP, a supplier management solution, to be able to work in your day to day go to AI assistant, whatever that might be. If it's, open AI and using ChatGPT, or if it's Anthropic and using Claude, or if it's, Gemini or Grok, or whatever it is that the business determines to use, the Copilot, so forth and so on, right? Um, I'm curious, in the businesses that you're working within, and or in the market as a consultant towards, do you see a, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess openness and acceptance to implementing the use of AI technologies, if only being more so those AI powered, search query type of business solutions. And if the answer is yes, how far do you think the jump is, for example, to getting that as the interface into the systems of record, like ERP and things of that sort,
Hmm.
or a business kind of cautious about the data sensitivity and things of that sort?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I guess the thing that surprised me most, Sam, when I became a freelance procurement consultant and operator, was how little, and I'm not even going to call it AI, how little digitization there is
Mm,
out there, from very large corporates, world leading corporations, to the small SMEs. So
mm.
so the first thing that I would say is there's a huge amount of variety, and I think people, like yourself and myself, and maybe the people who listen to this podcast, maybe we live in a kind of a bubble where we, listen to podcasts and go to conferences, and
It's
and
important to remember as well, no?
yes, because I lived in that bubble,
Mm,
and then I went to, like, a very, very large luxury goods company, very, very wealthy company, and they were really delighted with what I could do with my spreadsheet. And that I was doing commercial modeling in my Excel, which I had sort of built over the weekend, which they, was one of the most valuable things they wanted when our engagement was finished. And I
mm.
was thinking, okay, this is a different kind of environment, right, from
Right.
where I've come from.
Mm.
So what I find is it's surprising is that really some very large corporates sort of act as if it's not happening. Um, so now there is probably another sort of transformation team somewhere else in procurement that is thinking about things and you know, selecting tools and making a plan, etc. But it
Mm.
doesn't happen maybe in the way that, us who live in the bubble kind of think about it, I would say. Um,
Mm.
what the first point is there's a lot of variation. Um, I do think now in the last 8 months, 12 months, yes, I think it's now becoming the unavoidable. I think it's
Right.
unavoidable for every individual, every company, every function. So I think that is starting to change because it's just not tenable not to take notice. So
Mm.
so I think that's changing. I think that in small companies, so I particularly enjoy working with scaling companies.
Mm.
And what I see there is far more openness, and especially as you say to the the open AI models, where you can go in as a company with limited resources, with limited infrastructure, and you can go in and start talking to the
Mm.
AI and gathering a level of data that was never or capability, sorry, a level of capability that was never available
Right.
to you before. And that's one of the things I think is so exciting. And this is what I'm saying to sort of small SMEs and scaling enterprises is that um, those companies, I believe now, because of AI, have or will have the capability to really compete in a way that they haven't before. And you can see that if you look at, for example, consumer goods, which is again my speciality, and you look at the growth of small independent brands on selling direct to consumer all across the world in all sorts of areas, but say beauty care and industry, I know very well. Thousands and thousands of beauty care brands have all been enabled by the changes in marketing, in technology, with regards to supply chain and marketing primarily, and digital media. And but behind that, they were doing everything in a very manual, low-level way, but now they can really change, and they can now get value on both sides of their, company, looking externally into the consumer and into the supply base in a way that they couldn't before. And I think that's a huge unleashing, of power
Mm.
and capability, and I think that's where small procurement teams now, whether they're in very small companies or sometimes you have a large company that doesn't have a large procurement function, and those teams were very constrained before. So those procurement teams now are at the tipping point where it's like, okay, I can do those things too. And you can buy a suite, or you can buy small solutions, or you can make something with Claude, or not just Claude, other tools as well. So I think that's really, really exciting, and people can act much more independently and much more creatively, which also makes the job much more interesting, right?
Yeah. Could not agree more. And I want to talk a little bit about the job because we spoke a little bit in some of the pre-work about this concept of being a generalist, something that I think that you and I kind of found ourselves within, right?
Mm,
Um, with that being said, you had said to me that your realization in your career was that being a generalist might actually be your superpower. And we joked about the perspective of that. Well, in this age of AI, right? Being a generalist might be a subject matter expertise within itself, right? Being able to go and wear a lot of hats.
mhm,
It's a unique perspective that not many people maybe have the breadth to be able to
mhm,
do because that is something that A comes with experience, but B also is a particular, I would say, type of operator that
mhm,
also maybe has a strategic mindset to balance that. And that's not so typical to come by. Regardless, you
mhm.
know, do you think that procurement historically has like undervalued this breadth of experience? And do you think that it's going to change? Or what is kind of your expectations for the role of a generalist versus specialist moving forward? I'm just curious to your perspectives on that for like the
Mm,
next wave of talent.
mhm, mhm. That's a really interesting question. Because as you say, we talked about it before the podcast, and it's something that's come to me very recently. That
Eh,
what you said there. I think I was a bit, you know, ashamed of being a generalist for a while, because it was like, oh, is this somebody, who knows like a bit about lots of things and nothing
The
in
the
in
jack
in
of
a
all
me
trades and master of none type of
Yes.
context, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mm,
So, it
mm.
did crystallize for me when I was working in a procurement excellence transformation role at Pernod Ricard in Ireland, because we were setting up a procurement team from scratch. And what I realized is there are very few situations or procurement problems that I haven't come across before, or that if I haven't directly come across them before, I know somebody who came across them before that I can contact. So at that point, I began to realize, yes, that's very useful, and also then working in consulting and fractional leadership, you begin to see that you're able to kind of leapfrog and make connections from one situation to get to another. So the sum of the
That's
parts
interesting.
becomes greater, or the whole is
Mm,
greater than the sum of the parts. So you
mm,
start to see, okay, my experience in this area is actually augmented and complemented by my experience in all these other areas. So I have a perspective that others don't have, who have stayed in a narrower band. Um,
mm.
so that was my journey on that realization. And my own journey had been stimulated by I followed what I wanted to do. I'm a very curious person, and I don't like to be bored. So when I started to get
Yeah.
bored with something, I moved, and I felt often at the time that it wasn't the most wise career choice in terms of hierarchy and climbing the ladder and all of these things. But I just felt, well, I know I'm not the person who can just sit here for another 10 years hoping to go forward a little bit and a little bit. It's not going to work for me. Um, so that curiosity was always driving me forward, and now I sort of feel like it came full circle and got rewarded.
Mm.
Um, so your question was, do I think that's going to change?
Sure.
Um, it's not something I had thought about before, how open organizations are to it, but thinking about the the capability that's available to procurement people now, I imagine it may well do, because what was the
Mm.
big benefit of being a specialist? Like, you've bought packaging for 20 years. I bought packaging for 10 years, and honestly, I went back to it in a large consulting assignment a few years ago. And you know what? I found packaging is still made more or less in the same way. So things I knew about buying packaging were entirely relevant, plus a few new materials and technologies had come along. But you know what? It
Right.
actually didn't stop me buying packaging again. Um, so what was all that benefit? I think that now you will, because there's so much specialized knowledge that you can get from AI, that maybe the ability to see patterns and cross fertilize learnings and techniques from one area to another, maybe that is going to
Right.
become a more prized skill, because a lot
Mm.
of the very deep category knowledge that people had before was essential, because there wasn't, if you like, a public way to get that information. It did take years and years and years to gather all of that intricate knowledge of an industry, which is I don't think is ever going to be replaced by the fact that you can, you know, troll all your data internally, and you can do
Yeah.
industry analysis externally. I don't think that's, it's going to be replaced by that. But um, to a large degree, maybe that level of specialization is not going to be as important as it was in the past, because you have more tools at your disposition now. Um, and those tools are maybe going to help us, as we were saying before, prioritize the importance of thinking, and thinking deeply, and then drawing insight from what you have thought about, and translating that into action, and linking those actions to what is the goal you're trying to achieve. And often procurement gets a bit stuck in the middle of that. We kind of make decisions and we do things, but the strategic thinking is not always there because procurement has been typically bombarded with multiple demands, multiple problems, and a little bit disconnected from the business sometimes as well.
It's so well put, and I think that, it talks to a lot of the things that I think, we're approaching within our space of technology, and I think can translate over into procurement is that in this new era, there is this aspect of that, creativity, taste, pattern recognition, and as you said, agency or execution are the things that are going to win. And I think that those are maybe things that, lean towards a generalist's attributes,
Mhm.
maybe more
Mhm.
so than the specialist. Albeit, I think that it'll be an interesting, it's an interesting future ahead of us, and it's not right or wrong. I think to be one or the other, but it's an interesting item to be able to think a little bit more about. I love this perspective that you have about the idea of thinking, right? You said something to me prior that was quite fascinating. You said learning how to think can sometimes be the differentiator. What do you think that great procurement thinking looks like actually in practice? And can you give me like an example or two from your kind of prior experience, whether it be a P&G or BT or Pernod Ricard, Citibank, where you experience great thinking in
Mhm.
practice and what the outcome was as well?
Yeah, sure. The first thing I'd say is that what procurement need to be thinking about most of all is what the company is trying to achieve. So, what is the
Yeah.
company strategy? You should not spend all your time thinking procurement thoughts. Um,
Mm,
and unfortunately, many procurement teams are encouraged to, excuse me, to live like that and think like that. I do remember at
mm,
Citibank, which was not uh, the most procurement friendly environment, if I can put it like that. We had we had a director, a senior director, not the procurement director. It was the person the procurement director reported to,
mm.
and the procurement director or the CPO got a new boss. Um, and the new boss used to kind of come and walk around the floor. And after a few weeks, he got very, very annoyed that whenever he came to the floor, there were not enough procurement people on the floor. There were too many empty desks. So the CPO explained to him, no, the procurement people, when they're not here, they're out there. And out there means they're with suppliers and they're with
With suppliers,
stakeholders.
right, right,
Yes,
yeah.
or with
Mhm.
stakeholders. So
Right.
the CPO was trying to explain, no, when my people are not all sitting in the desks, I'm happy because they're out there doing what they're supposed to be. It didn't land very well, unfortunately, for the CPO when we got a mandate that I can't remember the number, but it was like at least one third of the desks must be occupied by procurement people at any time in case the
Okay.
director passes by because he doesn't want to see empty desks. So clearly he had missed the point entirely because the best the best procurement team is not sitting in its box thinking procurement thoughts all day long. They're out there
Mm,
talking to people and thinking either business thoughts or industry thoughts. So
mm.
I think that thinking is much underrated. Um, I have also worked in organizations where I've had to say to my own leadership, my job is not to prevent people having to think. And there's nothing that I can do that will prevent people having to think. The the fact that people have to think, and procurement people in particular have to think, is the reason we're still here and we haven't been replaced by machines.
Well said.
So, that point also didn't land terribly well, but, these are
Okay.
these are the conversations you have to have, right? So what should we
Yeah.
be thinking about? So, one should be thinking about first and foremost, where is my business trying to go? And
Mm,
how can I link the activity in my supply base and in my supply industries, or maybe
right.
internally, what's happening on the ground in reality with regards to suppliers? How can I link all of that, those two aspects, what's happening out there behind me in the supplier world to what the company is trying to achieve? And once you start doing that, then in my view, you're creating value because you are defining this is where procurement work should be leading, what it should be delivering. And that's when you get into the territory of it's not a narrow band. It could be cost today, it could be speed to market, it could be innovation, it could be transformation, which is we're all going through faster and faster now. It could
Right.
be risk, it could be supply chain resilience. So what you see in the broad procurement teams, the ones that are really high performing and really being innovative and creative, is that that's where they're thinking. Your job is to link up what's happening outside the company with what's happening inside the company and drive all of your part of the world in the right direction.
Here, here. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening outside the company, right? Because if you could do it, you wouldn't have a supplier. That's what procurement is there for, right? Is to manage vendor relationships. And,
Yes.
I think that the supply chain is such a vital and mission critical piece of any business, primarily within a lot of the industries that you've worked within, where direct materials and or finished goods are essential to the end product or service that business is delivering. You've been in a lot of different industry verticals, and and with that different context as well. I assume different dynamics within supplier relationship. I would love to touch upon, following this question, a little bit of those supplier dynamics in telecoms, because I know that you've mentioned it's specifically um, unique. But if we take a step back and just look at your career across these various organizations, I think you could ask any salesperson, hey, what's a deal that you won and you went up against it, or you had to get creative, you had to be innovative, and you came out on the other side, either learning something or winning in some way, shape, or form. Do you have a specific experience that comes to mind of like a supplier relationship, or something that has happened in your career that you can chalk up to the win column and or the learning column? There was a specific anecdote, and also maybe something that our listeners can take away from it as well.
Um, yeah, definitely, definitely. No, you made me think of two, Sam. Am I allowed to do two?
Please.
Um, one is a short one. It's about emotional intelligence
Mm,
in dealing with supplier relationships. And it was a very big negotiation. It was a long time ago, but it was a very big negotiation. It was pre the euro. That's how old I am. So we were negotiating for a supplier to bill us in a different currency. It was a supplier of direct materials, and this was a negotiation that had been going on for 2 years, even before I was the
oof.
category manager in
Mm,
that category. And it was a very critical supplier relationship and a very critical customer relationship for them. So we went over, and this was when I worked at Procter and Gamble, and we went over and we were very well prepared. We had a treasury department, and we had a file. You had to print everything out, so we had a file that thick of the currency exchange rate between these two currencies every day for the last 10 years.
mm,
Um, and we had various other information, so we had all the data. We had done a huge amount of data prep work, and we were having the big negotiation, and it was in Europe at a big conference table in a fancy office, and there was loads of people, and we kept pushing them. I kept pushing the supplier direct the supplier's customer lead for a number because we had proposed a rate, and
mm.
he kept saying no, and I was like, "Well, what's your number?" And then he said a number, and I said, "Well, what's that number based on?" And he couldn't tell me, and I kept pressing him, pressing him. In the end, I said, "Did you look it up and take it out of the newspaper today?" You know. So he at a certain point, this senior guy left the room. He had to go and talk to the owner of the company, and when he came back, I noticed that he had undone the top button of his shirt underneath his tie.
Okay.
And at that moment, I knew we had won the negotiation because his boss had told him, accept the number they proposed.
Mm.
So none of that was not about the numbers. That's about,
So interesting though, but the nonverbal communication of him kind of having to let his guard down in some way, shape, or form gave you the insight.
Yes, I absolutely knew when he walked in that the conversation was finished there. And so at that point, I said, "It's this number or we're leaving."
Great anecdote. Awesome
So,
anecdote. What's the second one?
so that was one. Now the other one is about telecoms, and as you said, telecoms is an evil, evil world when it comes to supplier relationships. So your suppliers are also
Mm,
your customers and your competitor
mm,
if you work in wholesale telecoms. So I worked in wholesale and retail. So we had a wholesale division in BT Ireland, very very low margin, 2% margins. So. Very, very difficult relationships with every single supplier. I mean, we're talking litigious, we're talking regulation, we're, you know, talking, all sorts of dirty tricks. So, um, the biggest success I would say that I had there from a if you want to call it a relationship point of view was that one of our suppliers who was also a major competitor to us had basically gone to the biggest wholesale customer and proposed a sort of a joint deal with them. So basically, they would be a joint supplier with us to our customer, and they were giving the customer fabulous financials, so they were delighted. But where it would have left us as the customer in this case, I'm sorry, as the supplier in this case, is that we would have been letting our competitor into our relationship with our customer. So
interesting.
from our customer's point of view, this looked like a fabulous idea because they would have resilience in their supply because they would have two providers. The other
Right.
company was giving them great financials, and they had written a few sort of small things down the bottom of the page that nobody read, but I read them. And what that would have given them would be that the other company could go direct to the supplier at the end and completely cut us out of our own customer relationship. Now, why did I spot that and nobody else spotted that? Because I worked with that supplier across many, many different customer relationships. So I knew the supplier's pattern of activity. I knew the way
Mm,
that they thought, and I also, in a sense, had a gut feel this is not a good deal. Something is wrong
mm.
here, and I'm not going to let it. I'm not going to let this go until I find out what's wrong. And I found out what's wrong, as I say, by reading the small print at the very bottom of the page, and um, and basically the customer proposal from us to our customer. The terms and conditions of that proposal were rewritten, and that protected our customer relationship, and that customer relationship was worth 7% of the revenue of that division.
Oh, wow.
So for me, that was absolutely massive, but it had absolutely nothing to do with procurement. It was about us acting as a supplier and not as a buyer.
Very interesting though, right? And I think it goes back to what we started on talking about. The ability for the human in the loop, regardless of the technology, to be focused on the pattern recognition and the emotional intelligence that one can be able to come with. And I think that that is a thing that in this era of AI cannot be forgotten. And I'm happy that you shared that insight with our listeners as well. I could be able to talk to you for a very long time, Adrienne. I feel that. With that being said, we need to start rounding out. And I have one last question for you before we get into our quick fire round. If you were to give yourself one tidbit of advice or a insight, for example, today, right, to Adrienne Cole, who's just beginning her career in procurement at Procter and Gamble, what would that piece of advice be?
Um, don't be a perfectionist. Yeah.
A good piece
Yes.
of advice for just about anyone, right? Don't let perfection become the
The enemy of
enemy of
good.
progress.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely suffered from that early in my career, and you spend a lot of time agonizing over things. And I think right now things are going so fast.
Yeah.
it's really, really a disadvantage. So I'm glad to say I think I've ditched it, but I would certainly not advise somebody to pursue it.
And I think that this is a relevant conversation in the age of AI as well, right? Because a lot of people are saying, well, AI is only getting 80% of the way there.
It's
Great.
plenty.
Get me 80% of the way there. That's plenty. It's just as
Yeah.
much as I would
Yeah,
want to be able to
get
get to as a
80% from
human.
AI, and then you add
Yeah.
on another 5%, another 10%. That's great,
Yeah.
because tomorrow it'll all be different. So, use it and move on.
Agreed. Agreed. Um, I would love to be able to do a quick fire round. We do it with all of our guests. One word or one sentence answers. Nothing about procurement, all about you, Adrienne. Is that okay?
Yes. Go on then.
Super. All right. I'm always curious if you didn't start your career in procurement, what do you think that you would want to be doing? Like, what was maybe your dream job? I assume that you,
Oh,
as a little girl, were growing up saying, "Oh, I want to go work in procurement one day," or maybe you were.
I was definitely not saying that. I would have liked to be an industrial product designer or an astrophysicist.
All right. Big ambitions. Very cool. Um, if you have an all expenses paid trip, you're leaving tomorrow. You can go by yourself. You can take friends or family. It's up to you. Where are you heading?
Ooh, sub-Saharan Africa. Never been there.
Okay. Very nice. We have this saying in Swedish. It's your paradrätt. It's when you have somebody over for dinner. It's the thing that you make them for dinner that you know that you're going to be able to nail and really have the guests have a great time enjoying this meal. What would it be?
Did it last week. Tiramisu.
Oh, lovely. Love a
Lived in
good
Italy for a
tiramisu.
while. I have a family recipe.
Ooh, all right. Very nice to hear. Very nice to hear. Well, I'm going to hold you to it if we ever have the opportunity to break bread.
Definitely, Sam. It will be my pleasure.
One last question. A podcast that you're listening to in a personal or professional context regularly, and or a book that's on your bedside table that you could suggest to our listeners.
Oh gosh. Podcast I'm listening to at the moment, non-procurement related, is a BBC podcast from the late 1990s, and it's called In the Psychiatrist's Chair. It's Professor Anthony Clare interviews different people, famous people, controversial people. Very, very interesting, very structured, thought-provoking interviews. And a book that's on my bedside table. I recently finished a book called The Unsung Hero. Tom Crean, Unsung Hero. So Tom Crean was an Antarctic explorer. He went on Scott's polar expedition and Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expeditions. And it's utterly fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So all that stuff about going to South Georgia and the pole and
Mm.
Elephant Island and all the things that Scott did wrong versus Amundsen, the Norwegian, who got to the pole a lot quicker. And one of the reasons he got to the pole a lot quicker and without anybody dying, which was the difference with Scott, was that Amundsen took advice.
Ah, take advice. Well, listen, I think that those that are listening into today got a few tidbits of advice where we were able to also explore how sourcing and procurement plays a role in the way we live and plays a role in global businesses. Thank you so much, Adrienne, for joining and sharing your insights. If people that are listening in want to be able to learn more about your services or just be a part of your network, what's the easiest and best way to do so?
Yes, just look me up, Adrienne Cole on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is always open and I would love to hear from you. Always happy to chat and offer some advice or help you with some business problems.
Thank you so much for being on today's episode, Adrienne. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me, Sam. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to you coming to Ireland for some tiramisu.
Looking forward to it myself.